Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for attending this session. My name is Peter Gerhardt. I'm from the small organization Denkhaus Bremen. We are mainly engaged in building dialogues. One of our topics is bioeconomy. And with our colleagues from other NGOs, we try to make our mind up regarding the bioeconomy, and we are in close contact with policymakers, with scientists, and also other stakeholders of the debate. This panel is to explore whether the bioeconomy is part of a solution or part of the problem, I would say. And this is exactly the debate we will have here. And I'm really appreciate if we have a good dialogue all together. I'm not a professional facilitator, you know, you feel that already. But I will light the campfire for everyone, that we have a good conversation here in the room. So that's very important, I would say. We have three presentations or three speeches at this panel. I will introduce the panelists later on a little bit more. It's Joachim Spangenberg from Friends of the Earth Germany. It's Morgan Audy from La Via Campesina and Jutta Kill, activist researcher. And this will be followed by a discussion, and we have lots of space to discuss things with each other. I don't know if any one of you read the sheet which was issued by the organizers, the fact sheet about the bioeconomy. It was some kind of bioeconomy strategy in mini, I would say. It was, some points were mentioned there, like planetary boundaries, like sustainable production of bio-based raw materials. It was about the reduction, reduce and recycle. It was about the importance of dialogue, of exchange. And it also was about frameworks like the right to food and the access to land. This sounds, on paper, very good, I would say. And many NGOs can cope with this, and there are many points where we can come together. But how does it look actually on the street in practice? How is it implemented? And this is the question which is on the topic here. On the other hand, there's no, it's a no-brainer that the fossil world is ending, and that also the mineral resources are ending, and therefore we need some kind of other shift, or we need some kind of new idea. And maybe that is the bioeconomy. Nobody knows it exactly up to now. When you look at some first products that pop out now on the market, some of them make sense and some of them not. There is a plant bottle of Coca-Cola made from sugar cane from Brazil. We can discuss if that is a useful product or not. But also there are insulation materials made from black liquor from paper plants. And this is maybe a way forward we can look together in deeper. But let's come to the few points that were mentioned in this leaflet, in this handout. It was about producing sustainable, ecologically sustainable biomaterials. And when you look already at the globe, then it is already completely overbooked. When you speak to climate people, then they say, well, we have to plant trees. We have to invest more in capturing carbon in the biosphere. When you go to the biodiversity people, they say we have to have biodiversity in many areas, and we have to put things aside to have this biodiversity there on the area. And we have, of course, it should be feed the people, it should deliver construction materials, it should feed the paper mills, and now on top comes the bioeconomy. And when you put all these layers all together, then we need 3 globes. That's at least the conclusion of many experts, I would say. Reduction is also very nice, and also in nearly every strategy it is mentioned. But what does that mean in practice? What do we want to reduce? And that is never mentioned exactly. And from our point of view, or from the point of view of many NGOs, it is stop burning wood, for example, because it makes no sense that we have power stations run by wood, because then we can't use it for construction material anymore. And on the other hand, there's this massive industrial meat production where lots of arable land is reserved for feed. And not only here at the global north, everybody knows this here in this room, of course, also in the global south. We pick our resources there, we shop around. And it is also highlighted the importance of exchange, of dialogue. That sounds very nice to have a stakeholder conversation, but it's more than sitting around table in the middle of the room. It needs resources. And even in the global north, it's hard to cope with all the industry lobbyists as an NGO. And when you visit parliamentarians at the European Parliament, they say, yes, nice, Peter, that you were here today, but we have already 10 people from the industry that came also. And that's only the perspective, of the global north. In the global south, even people don't have the money for the bus ticket to go to some venue where stakeholderism is placed. And we don't have to forget there is a difference between stakeholders and right holders, and that is often mixed completely, because there are also rights to land, rights to food, right for people to survive, and that's a completely different approach. And these frameworks, like the right to food, for example, which is often mentioned, and the right to land, when you look at the practice in the global south, at least from my experience, I'm working for NGOs now for 30 years, it is never really gone into practice. For example, in Mozambique, eucalyptus companies are expelling farmers for paper. In Liberia, 25% of the country is already given to oil palm companies, and maybe it's already more. That's an old figure when I was there 10 years ago. And large sugarcane plantations where slavery labor takes place in Brazil, and so there are many examples where this isn't in place at all. And therefore, we dive deeper into this now here. And especially the right to food is often mentioned very well. And I'm very much happy to introduce now Joachim Spangenberg to the stage. Joachim is a biologist and also economist, Joachim, but he will introduce you properly, maybe better than I can. And you worked for numerous research organizations. You were also part of the German Bioeconomy Council. You are the chair of the Scientific Advisory Board of Bund, of Friends of the Earth Germany, and therefore also a member of the panel of the board of Friends of the Earth Germany. Joachim, you have the stage to elaborate a little bit more about Food First. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you together. Thank you for being here. And sooner or later, yeah, there is a PowerPoint. I have to explain what is the basis of that. The German government had 2 so-called bioeconomy councils, which were essentially organizations consisting of some scientists close to industrial production and business itself. And they were advising the Ministry of Research and ordering some money for their project there. that changed in the last election period when the government decided that the third Bioeconomy Council, and that was the one I was member of, should be representative of different groups of society. So we had, for the first time, not only the Ministry of Agriculture and Research involved, but also the Ministry of the Environment nominating people, and people from civil society organizations. So we should try to find in this council a kind of what might be a societal consensus on certain bioeconomy issues. And that's what we tried. That means some issues we didn't discuss from the outset because it was pretty clear that an agreement or consensus on the issue of genetic engineering, GMO and GMOs in food would not be possible. So we didn't discuss that. But we discussed issues like food because, of course, agriculture is the most important part of the bioeconomy. And in the first set of resources, set of recommendations that we had, there was broad consensus on almost everything, but there was one dimension where there was a minority vote and we couldn't agree. And that was when people coming from the technology side insisted that the future of healthy and coherent nutrition would be protein fermentation in industrial fermenters, which then would be the raw material from which to produce food. We thought that this is only a raw material. You can't eat bacteria from the fermenter. So they must be processed. They must be adding color and minerals and taste chemicals and press them into certain structures so that they feel like something else than bacteria and so forth. In other words, it is ultra-high processed food, and that's the basis for it. And we know since the last couple of years what is the health impact of ultra-high processed food. It's heart strokes, it's liver problems, it's cancer problems, it's ruining the human biome, and more. So that was the point where the disagreement was, and so when we finished our work, we came to the point that we said there are, as Peter already mentioned, very many promises, always. This is a priority, physical use instead of energy, food first is a priority, but there are never any mechanisms of how priorities are implemented. So we got a team together to discuss with external experts from many organizations how can food first, or the human right to a healthy and sufficient nutrition, be implemented. And that was in clear contradiction to that fermentation food. And that is the reason why in the end the whole paper was boycotted and not adopted by the Bioeconomy Council. And that is why I'm glad to present the results here, which we could not deliver at that. What I show you is the idea of things that we wanted to organize, and then recommendations which are very German government centric, because we wanted to make suggestions to the German government how to implement it. So how do you get to the next? Yeah, it works. Okay, so the promise is omnipresent, I already said. The documents say there is nothing how it's being operationalized. And the protein products are suggested by some people. So we had the preference to go for a different way, saying we want to use the arable land for food as a priority. So the only way to make it available in an economic context of a market economy, the only way to make secure that you have enough land for food is reduce other demands for land. And the first one is, why do we have bioenergy production still on some 20% of the German land? And secondly, why do we have 60% of the arable land for grazing? So there is a certain amount of land which cannot be used else than for grazing. But a lot of arable land is used for grazing, which could be used for food production. So our idea was end and phase out the, that's the suggested measures, end and phase out the energy production, bioenergy production, and take measures to reduce the amount of grazing animals in our landscape. So, and that is the three different proposals we had, how that could be operationalized, because operationalizing was important. The animal welfare levy, the livestock-related emissions included in the carbon trade system, and the nitrogen levy, which is being discussed, also applied to feed that is imported because the nitrogen, after passing through the animals, ends up in our environment. So the second issue we had is address the legal challenges. There is people who are, so some governments are on the international level very strongly promoting the further expansion of bioenergy and biomass production. For example, the Brazilian government and its sugar barons who are trying to get everything expanded, but not only them. So the government was called upon to resist these pressures and to include the elements of which kind of work is being done and whether these things are environmentally benign into the due diligence legislation. So opposing the international efforts, we wanted that for all land-intensive investment by public companies and investment in a context, the so far voluntary guidelines should be made mandatory by the government, which it could do. So every national government could do that if they wanted to. And the land right violation should be an explicit, Peter mentions the rights, land right violation should be an explicit offense under the European Supply Chain Directive. So that would be elements a government could do to make sure that the sufficient food is possible. The third and last point is there can be positive elements in bioeconomy. As a biologist and economist, of course, I'm the born bioeconomist, and I look for the positive things, because if you are from the Rhineland, you always look for the positive side of things. So why not look for the positive side? So a healthy food supply must go beyond the caloric value. The caloric value must be there, of course, but we have today in the world as much people who have malnutrition because they are lacking minerals, vitamins, and things like that, as people who have a caloric deficit. So where do you get your vitamins from? You get it from biodiversity. You need vegetables, you need fruit, and for that you need, for example, pollinators. No pollinators, no fruit, no healthy diet. So the point is, if you really want to have the right to sufficient and healthy diet, that requires protection of biodiversity as well. You cannot separate the issues. So we said that that must be an important measure. Secondly, one thing which is always mentioned in biodiversity and climate issues is the carbon sequestration. And also in the government plans, increasing the amount of carbon in the soil is a very important sink for carbon, natural sink for carbon. However, that requires a different kind of agriculture. With the current kind of agriculture, you are losing carbon. We're having erosion, we are losing carbon content in the soil. And if you do not really manage to shift towards agroecology and organic agriculture, you will not be able to go that way. This is why we have the opportunities that are objectives, and the measures we suggest is that in the next CAP, Common Agricultural Policy of the European Union, there should be incentive for the diversification, including crop rotation, catch crops, for nitrogen, smaller fields and hence biodiversity. It's not about the size of farms, it's the size of fields. Hedges, hedge growth, green strips, trees, wetland, and so forth. So bringing nature back into agriculture or bringing agriculture closer to nature, that is the conditio sine qua non. In the meantime, the government should work with the federal states to implement that. And we found that we need some more experience, and that's the last point, in good grazing. There are areas, I said, which are not usable for plugging, so they are usable for grazing. But when grazing is being done there, it should, to the best that we know, be done by mixed herds of sheep and goats and cows and horses and what have you. Have a camel at hand, so give it to us. So that is this mixed kind of herds. They are feeding on different kinds of plants, so they have a very diversified use of the land, and they, through their use of the land and the way they are trampling on it and shitting on it, they are significantly increasing the carbon content of the soil. Herds of grazing animals are a carbon sink, not a carbon source. Put the animals in the stable, they're a carbon source. In the land, they're a carbon sink. And we need more experience with that, with these mixed herds. We suggested to have some experimental testing. So that were the proposals that we had, and that were the proposals which those scientists who see the future coming out of a fermenter could not agree with, and I hope the alternatives that I presented will be interesting to you and for a discussion. Thank you.
As we have not only 3 presenters, is there one question of understanding? No, everything was pretty clear. Then I have the honor to call Morgan Audi to the stage. You are the general coordinator of La Via Campesina, but you're also a vegetable grower from France. As I have it right, Via Campesina is a peasants' movement with more than 180 members, but it's more than that, and maybe you will elaborate a little bit more on that. And you are fighting, or you are struggling, and you are engaged for food sovereignty, agroecology, agrarian reform, and also on feminism. You are active. You have the stage.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. So indeed, I'm a small-scale farmer or peasant farmer in Brittany. And I am a member of Confédération Paysanne, that is the French peasant organization. And Confédération Paysanne is a member of La Via Campesina, who I have the honor to be the general coordinator. So indeed, La Via Campesina has 180 member organizations throughout the world, in every part of the world. And we gather around 200 million small-scale farmers and agricultural workers around the world, which makes Via Campesina one of the biggest social movements in the world. And all over the world, peasants are among the poor people, the marginalized people. So I would say in order to start that for La Via Campesina, climate crisis, first it's a reality in our everyday life. As farmers, we feel the climate crisis every week, every month, because we see the climate changing. So we take it very seriously that we should act seriously against the climate disaster. And for us, climate crisis can only be tackled through social justice. There is enough wealth in the world to ensure decent life for everybody. But there is not enough wealth to ensure the overconsumption of a minority of super rich people. We must, I think, remind that 90% of the world's population produces level of greenhouse gas emissions which are within the Paris Agreement. So the problem is not in 90% of the world's population. It is in the 10% of the rich or wealthy people, which make most of the middle class in Europe or in Northern America. So the target for any serious global initiative to seriously tackle the climate disaster should be about reducing the greenhouse gas emissions of the rich people. That should be the target. And that is never addressed by people who talk about bioeconomy. So, what is bioeconomy about? It is about pretending that it's possible to replace everything we produce through fossil fuel, from fuel to all plastics and so many things, by biomass source products. In some sense, we could say that the economy prior to the 19th century was bioeconomy. So it used to be that everything or almost everything was produced outside of fossil fuel. So in some sense, if it is, and we know that the climate crisis is linked to the fact that we started to use massively fossil fuel for everything. And that had a huge impact on every aspect of the economy, and I would say on every aspect of the everyday life of us in the global north, but not at the global level. And the increase of production has been completely huge. So the problem is that the use of fossil fuel allowed to multiply in an incredible way the level of consumption, first of the wealthy people, then of the middle class in the global north, and then also of wealthy people in the global south. So now, in order to produce with biomass all what we produce currently with fossil fuel, it would require a huge part of the resources about land, water, everything. It would require that we direct towards this goal a great part of these resources. And this is where we have a big problem, because agriculture would be given the task not to produce food anymore, but to produce what the wealthy people of the world need to maintain their level of consumption. So already we know that peasants, small-scale farmers, and indigenous people produce 70% of the food on only 30% of the arable land. So already in the situation that we have right now, the big industry and transnational companies control over 70% of the land, and they produce only 30% of the food. So why is this? First, because contrary to what is often being said, industrial agricultural way of production is not effective. Monoculture and industrial animal farming, it's not effective. It consumes a lot of land and a lot of water and a lot of energy for very little production, much less than peasant agricultural production. But the other reason why agro-industry produces so little food is that they direct their production not towards food, but towards other types of consumption, towards agrofuel, towards cotton, towards other kind of biomass that do not go into the food, but that go into other kind of consumptions, which are overwhelmingly for the use of the upper classes and the people of the global north, and not the majority of the people. And so bioeconomy is about increasing this. It's about increasing the fact that transnational companies would use more and more land, more and more water, not to produce the food for the whole population of the world, but in order to produce what wealthy people of the world, and in particular wealthy people of the global north, need to maintain the same way of life. So the consequences at the global level are massive trends towards land and water grabbing. So pushing peasants and indigenous people out of territories in order to produce more biomass, so through monocultures, but also something that you mentioned partially, sometimes also in order to sell carbon credits. So to pretend that you will be sequestrating carbon in order to sell carbon credits, not recognizing that it is what we as peasants, we do it anyway, even when we don't sell carbon credits. And it's we know, and every scientific person knows that with the current level of production, it's not possible. It's not feasible to replace what we consume with fossil fuel with production linked to biomass. We don't have enough space. It's just not possible. We don't have enough land. We don't have enough water, so that's not possible. The other thing is that bioeconomy, so the people who are pro-bioeconomy will say, okay, we need to produce more. If we need to produce both the food and every stuff that we produce through fossil fuel, we need to produce more. So very often the people promoting bioeconomy will say, okay, so we need GMOs. We need fast-growing trees which will grow fast through GMOs. So the narrative around bioeconomy is very much linked to biotechnology and to other kind of nanotechnologies. So it's about a greater artificialization of nature. And that's the reason why a lot of people defending biodiversity are very much against, saying, okay, but you're saying it's for climate, but you will completely destroy the biodiversity. So there is a big problem about it. And we all know that when these monocultures of biomass are implemented, it's about monoculture with great use of chemical fertilizers, which have a huge bad impact for the climate through nitrogen and everything, with great use of pesticides, and with a complete monoculture without any biodiversity. And then what we see is that through this bioeconomy narrative are pushed new kinds of free trade agreements. And I think it's very clear that the EU-Mercosur free trade agreement, which is being pushed a lot by the German government, is about bioeconomy. And it's about maintaining colonial relations between the global north and the global south, because it's about keeping the industry in the global north and buying raw materials, so biomass, but also all kinds of minerals and that are done through extractivism from the global south, and not allowing countries like Brazil or other countries in Latin America, and even more countries from Asia and Africa to develop their own industrialization, their own industry. And I think that there is a right claim from the global south to develop car industry. Why would all the cars of the world be built in Germany? They have the right also to produce, to develop an industry and to develop the jobs that go with it in order to, well, to have these technologies and to have all those things. So that's the reason why, as a peasant movement, we clearly oppose all these free trade agreements, because they are bad for the people of the global south, but also for the peasants in Europe. Because once again, it's not about creating a society for more justice for everybody. It's about maintaining the way of life of the richest people in the global north as well, and not in favor of all the people in the global north. In France alone, 50% of the people are within the Paris Agreement. So there is no problem with the working class in France. There is no problem. There is a problem with the wealthy people, also in the global north. So we should stop opposing the working class of the global north to the people in the global south. Actually, we should be united in our struggle against the way of life and the way of consumptions, not only of the transnational companies, but also of these billionaires, millionaires, and all very rich people who are the problem. We have a problem with them. We are the 99% of the people, and they are the 1% with whom we have a problem. And this is one of the reasons why now hunger is rising in the world. We now have more people hungry now than we had 6 years ago. We have more than 133 million people hungry in the world. And even in the global north, in France, 15% of the people depend on food banks for eating every day. So even in Europe, we have a problem with food. People don't have access to food anymore. And a lot of these people who go to the food banks, they are workers, but their salaries are not high enough for them to buy food, not even talking of healthy food, not even talking of vegetables, not even talking about fresh food. So we do have a big problem with hunger in the world, and this bioeconomy will not solve the issue. I will try to wrap up very clearly. In Via Campesina, we do have alternatives. Once again, we think that climate crisis is a crisis, we need to tackle it. Hunger is a big crisis, we need to tackle it. Neocolonialism and imperialism is a big problem, and we need to tackle it. And we need to tackle it by bringing the people together through internationalism. So our alternative is based on 5 main big things. First is agrarian reform. We need to share in a fair way the land, the water, and for this we are working together with some governments, in particular from Latin America, in particular with Colombia, towards a new international conference for agrarian reform and rural development that will take place in Colombia in 2026. And it's for sharing the land with the peasants, indigenous people, women, in order to produce food and what people need to live. The second is peasants and indigenous people rights in the framework of human rights. For us, human rights are very important, and we do consider that we need to take it seriously, and up to now it's not been taken seriously. The third aspect is agroecology. And agroecology, it's not only a set of practices. I am an organic farmer, but agroecology, it's not only organic farming. Agroecology is about getting away from the idea that as humans, we are the owners and the master of nature, which is very deeply in our mind as European people, and to go towards another way of relationing ourselves with the nature based on respect with the nature, much closer from indigenous people and historical peasant of way of working and living with the nature. The third one is food sovereignty. It's about democratic decisions on how land is being used and how food and agricultural policies are being decided and implemented. It's about fair incomes for the workers, and in particular for the small-scale food producers, in order to reduce inequalities. We do need degrowth in the global north in order to have development in the global south, but degrowth should not be done as it is done right now against the working class in the global north. No, it should be the rich people of the global north being taxed heavily so that we can maintain a high level of public services for education, health, housing and food for everybody, for the societies in the global north and the global south. And last but not least, it's about stopping imperialism and wars for resources. We need to assess that most of the wars that are currently taking place in the world are about grabbing land in order to grab the wealth that the nature can provide, because we know that the planet is limited. So now we have all the empires fighting together to try to grab the last resources of the world. And I think that we, as the people, we should refuse that. We should say that we are against all these kinds of imperialism, and we don't want these wars. We want to unite as people for food sovereignty, for agroecology, for human rights against these imperialisms. So I will stop here, but just to say that I do think that as a peasant movement, we are trying to build this internationalism from below. The workers' movement played a key role in the 19th and 20th centuries to build internationalism, and I think that we owe them a great duty. But it's quite interesting that I think that now a peasant movement is one of the strongest international global movement, because that means that also we've been thinking, reflecting on our relation as human societies with the nature. So I think that the fact that La Via Campesina exists and is an important social movement in the world right now also reflects on the fact that we do want to be all equals among human beings. And I think that the value of equality between men and women, between people of the global south and of the global north, between people from different religions is a very important value of Via Campesina. But we also want to change the relation with the nature out of domination, and with a relation also more of equality and respect with nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Morgan. Is there also a question of understanding, not discussion? You can already think about questions for discussion later on. Then I would say I would like to call Jutta Kill to the stage. Jutta is biologist, is that right? Yeah, Jutta. But you are also an activist researcher and you work for several NGOs. We know us quite for a long time. And I know your research is in order to support communities who have to oppose big companies which want to grab the land of the communities or want to take the land for green economy issues or whatever. You will bring us a little bit more to the ground, what happens with bioeconomy in the ground, especially in the global south, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Peter, and hello, everybody. I'm glad we're here for this discussion, and thank you to Morgan for raising a lot of the issues that I will also touch on and give you some examples of what bioeconomy today means in the real world. Bioeconomy in the current agro-industrial model does inevitably perpetrate colonial injustices, and it fuels land conflicts. It does so because, as has been mentioned both by Peter and by Morgan, trying to replace the material flow-through, the material use of stuff that we use currently, and trying to just replace material flows that we have come to use in the global north, in the fossil fuel-based economy, trying to replace that material flow at current levels of material use will inevitably require massive areas of land that do not exist. So trying to square a circle in the current economic and agro-industrial model with the power relations that define that model inevitably means land conflict. There is no way around that. And we see that Peter, in the opening statement, he mentioned the nice words in the leaflet for this forum. And he pointed out that different industry sectors double and triple count the amount of land that they want to use. But the earth is only there once. So inevitably, trying to implement a bioeconomy in the current agro-industrial system will mean perpetrating the injustices that exist and have colonially existed. And it will mean large land conflicts and even more land conflicts, because for many communities in the global south, conflict over land, often fueled and caused by northern companies, already is a reality. Peter, you said at the beginning, stakeholder discussions are often limited by resources. I would say for a lot of our colleagues in the global south, they're limited by another factor, and that is by the fact that they're jailed or harassed. They cannot even go because they've been put in jail for standing up for the land that they need to grow food and make a living. So just to give us an idea of what these numbers and saying there's only one planet mean in reality. If we look at material consumption, we see very clearly that there are only very few countries in the world today that don't overshoot with their national consumption what the earth can provide. And I want to highlight the point that Morgan made. Of course, in every country, in every society, not everybody has equal access to resources. So in each of those graphs, we also see hidden in the background the inequalities and injustices and unequal access to land and resources that exist in every society. So talking about bioeconomy from a justice perspective inevitably and obviously also means looking at the unequal access to food, to land, to good life within each society, but highlighting with these two graphs that in the current level of material use that exists, there is no such thing as a bioeconomy that our planet will be able to sustain. So let's look at just 3 examples very quickly of how land use under the heading of bioeconomy in the large sense already is causing conflict in the global south. And I would like to give you a little bit of a challenge as I go through, or a question as I go through these 3 examples. See if you can find a pattern in the 3 examples that I will give. The first is ever more land is being locked up in the global south for carbon capture, for carbon storage. A study by the European Joint Research Centre in 2023 calculated that to compensate the global carbon dioxide emissions of just 1 year, would require an area larger than Germany, France, and Spain together to be covered in trees and maintained. So the second year, there would be another area of Germany, France, and Spain somewhere else to capture the greenhouse gas, the CO2 emissions in that study. It was limited to CO2 emissions. Impossible. And the compensation is already happening. And many European industrialized countries, European, North American, Japanese countries are already occupying large areas of land in the global south, pushing people in the global south off their lands by restricting people's access to land for carbon offsets. 2 examples. In the Republic of Congo, the French energy company Total Energies, in order to present the illusion to us that it is possible to use carbon-neutral fossil fuels, carbon-neutral petrol, carbon-neutral heating oil, Total Energies is running a tree plantation in the Republic of Congo, and that land was used already by communities, by people who now have nowhere else to go. Nowhere else to go is what the person in the interview says. Where should I go to grow my food? That is only one of the many examples. I could cite examples of Shell, I could cite examples from BP, I could cite examples from the Italian oil company Eni, and many other corporations that are starting to take up and lock up large amounts of land to sell their fossil fuel products as climate neutral, which they are not. And on top of that, the land grab in the global south for supposedly carbon neutral production of fossil fuel-based products is growing quickly. And it's nothing new. Already 20 years ago, actually 30, I miscalculated, 20 years ago, tree planting for carbon run by a Dutch company in Uganda was pushing people off their land. I could go on. We could have a whole session only on examples from carbon companies pushing people off their lands. But let's go to another example of the bioeconomy pushing people off their lands. Remember the miracle crop jatropha? I think 10 years ago, probably there were many sessions at forums like this one about the potential of jatropha. Well, most of those miracle crop plantations, they have been abandoned, given up, because the miracle didn't materialize. But the land is still controlled by the corporations, by the companies that were given the concessions to run those miracle crop jatropha plantations. One example is the Italian company Tozzi Green in Madagascar. Tozzi Green, for more than 15 years now, has been causing conflict with the communities in that part in central Madagascar. Initially, Tozzi Green was given a concession to set up that miracle crop jatropha plantation. Well, the plantation failed very quickly. Tozzi Green kept the concession. It experimented around with a little bit of geranium for oil production in the cosmetics industry. And now, after that also didn't generate the sufficient profits it was looking to, Tozzi Green is using the concession to plant trees for carbon offsets. The concession, the jatropha plantation has long failed, has long gone. But the concession, the problem for the communities, is still there. Let's look, and we could go around the world. We could go to Tanzania, we could go to Kenya, we could go to Uganda and find jatropha concessions that are still existing, even though the plantations themselves never materialized or were abandoned very quickly. Those concessions were given, by and large, with very few exceptions, to companies in the global north, or were run with connection or with participation of corporations in the global north. That's why in the beginning I was talking about perpetuating a colonial pattern of northern occupation of land in the global south, to feed northern interests and not the priorities of communities in the global south. We can quickly run through the project in Tanzania was with the involvement of a Dutch company. The second project in Tanzania was with the involvement also of a Dutch company. We see UK-based companies, we see American, US-based companies, but very rarely do we see companies with roots in those communities where the projects are happening. Finally, let's take a look at maybe the new miracle crop, sugarcane. It's been there for a very long time, and it's caused land conflicts, and it's been implicated, or the production of sugarcane in the global south, Brazil in particular, has been associated with slavery probably as long as sugarcane has been produced in Brazil. And that reality, despite labels suggesting that the production of sugarcane today is just and fair and without slave labor conditions, slave slavery in sugarcane production still is a reality for too many people working in the sugarcane industry, in particular in Brazil. Yet we see companies like Tetra Pak saying, we have found the solution for the Tetra Pak, no longer fossil fuel based, but sugarcane based. Well, if that is the bioeconomy, then that one world will not be enough. Because the question, what is produced, by whom and for whom, as Morgan pointed out, is the crucial question that would have to be at the beginning of the bioeconomy discussion. But it isn't discussed. The question of what is to be produced in future, for what do we as societies want to produce, and what can we afford to grow biomass for? And what kind of material use does have to go? Because there only is one planet. And ending with the reminder that at the current scale, with the lack of discussion about priorities, with the lack of discussion about who produces what and for whom, bio-based economy and bioeconomy in the current agro-industrial model will perpetuate and already is perpetuating colonial injustices, and it will and already is increasing corporate control over community lands and is fueling far too many conflicts already.
I would like to ask all the speakers to our mini panel, to our mini stage. No, it's not that mini, of course. Are there any questions? The floor is open to questions because we have half an hour. I don't know where is only one mic there. But Joachim, you want to go first, please.
Does it work? Yeah. No? No. Yes. No. Oh. So my point is, when you listen to the presentations, there seems to be a kind of contradictions between the different presentations. I just want to illustrate two things. One thing is that until 2020, the whole German bioeconomy discourse was exactly replacing fossil fuels as a kind of a substitute. No? Wow. Oh, even better. Could you hear the first sentence in the back? Okay. So until 2020 in Germany, the discourse on bioeconomy was exactly as described, replacement of fossil fuels. And to my big surprise, and in a big meeting with business and researchers, suddenly they came along and said, no, of course we know quantitatively all biomass of the earth can only replace a fraction of the fossil fuels. Someone has done the figures. And it can only be a smaller contribution to a bigger overall change. So the question then was clear that this is not a substitute. Secondly, the German government was clever in playing the following trick, insisting that agriculture, forestry, fisheries, but also traditional industries like baking bread, or in Germany, very important, brewing beer, are part of the bioeconomy. And that means also organic agriculture is part of the bioeconomy in this definition. And that is why we do not say bioeconomy as such is a mess, but we say we cannot say anything about bioeconomy as such because there are some elements which we like. Sustainable forestry, organic agriculture, and all of the other stuff is something we criticize. So I think that is a different definitions of bioeconomy I wanted to clarify, because otherwise what we said looks as being in contradiction, which in fact it isn't, because this kind of bioeconomy which is exploiting the global south is exactly the thing that we strictly reject. So just for clarity.
There is a mic, please. Here is also one mic, Josephine. There are some questions in the back. Maybe please introduce yourself and.
Is it on? Yeah, okay. Then I take just this. My name is Annette Pollux. I work for the DBFZ, German Biomass Research Center, and I Thank you very much for this very critical and engaged talks that you had here. And my question is, true, it's very critical aspects, but do you also see chances for the bioeconomy?
There was a second question down there, and then we go back to the stage.
Thank you very much. Orsia Frison from DG Agri, European Commission. Very interesting, in fact, all the presentations. Also going in the same direction, all the two other interventions before. Bioeconomy is not something one. There is different way of seeing bioeconomy, and as you said, there are risks related to that. But I think it's difficult to contest that we need bioeconomy that is providing new biofertilizers, new biopesticides. And if we see bioeconomy as a chance to go for more sustainability, more regenerative agriculture, it can represent additional income for farmers. We can valorize the byproducts of the agricultural production. We can have many other uses of the biomass in a complement to food. So I understand the risk you said, but I would still think that bioeconomy is something that is happening. It's happened in the 19th century, as you cleverly said. So that is something that is outside. The question is how we do that. And the panel that we had before, that was the question that bioeconomy is highly political. We need to make now very important choices on how we develop bioeconomy. But bioeconomy is something I would see as an opportunity.
So the question goes right to the stage here. What can be the positive aspects? Is there any positive from your point of view? Morgan, do you want to go first, or Jutta?
I think the big problem is that there is a lack of recognition, in particular in the global north, that we need to tackle massively inequalities, and that there will be no solution out of not only the climate disaster, but also the biodiversity disaster, the hunger disaster, if we do not tackle massively inequalities. North-south inequalities, gender inequalities, and class inequalities. And for this, there is no other way but to take down the very wealthy people. The very wealthy people need to pay massively taxes. They need to reduce their incomes so that the rest of the people in the world can have a decent life. If they continue their way of life, it is at the expense of the other people. And this is what we are seeing now. Hunger is increasing now because the rich people do not want to calm down. So I think that as long as it is the case, we will be against bioeconomy. We must first address inequalities. I just also want to come on two experiences. We were at the Committee on Agriculture of FAO in end of September, and that was about bioeconomy. And, well, not very surprisingly, all the governments are in favor, because all the governments all over the world are overwhelmingly representing the wealthy and rich people. And it's so comfortable for everybody to pretend that we can tackle the climate crisis without reducing massively the inequalities. It's so comfortable. So there is no, but we as the people, as social movements, we cannot take this lie. And the other thing that I want to say is that on the revenue and the incomes of the farmers, we do produce food, and we do deserve a decent revenue for our food production. And we have enough of everybody telling us, well, okay, you're not paid correctly for producing food, so you should have solar panels, or you should produce agrofuel, or you should produce, and then you will deserve a revenue. No, we deserve a revenue for producing healthy food for the people. And so we want fair prices for producing food, and we have enough of everybody telling us that we should do agrotourism or other things, and accept that producing food does not make a fair revenue. That is not acceptable. That is not acceptable in Germany. That's not acceptable in France. That's not acceptable in Brazil. That's not acceptable in Mali. We want fair revenue, and for this we need public policies of market regulation, ensuring minimum support price for food products everywhere, and fighting the speculation, because we know that we are paid not enough for what we produce, and that the consumers pay too much, and that in between
big companies are making huge profits, and that's not okay.
Thank you very much. Jutta, do you see positive aspects regarding the bioeconomy?
The positive aspects, for one, are a land grab for the other. And I think that is the crucial issue. Trying to produce the material that one would need 4 or 5 planets for on the one planet, the chances and the nice little projects, or nice big projects even, run the risk of becoming a greenwash for the colonial land grabs that also continue to go on under the name and in the name of bioeconomy. And that is the issue. First questions have to come first. And that first question is, how much can one planet produce in a way that addresses historical injustices, that addresses the ongoing land grab that we see perpetrated on the land in the global south, and injustices within societies. And therefore, the chances, if we want to see bioeconomy as chances, those questions have to be put on the table. Where are they being properly discussed, meaningfully and honestly discussed? I know they're not easy, because for many of us in the global north, it means talking about privileges. It means talking about change. I'm sure we can do this. I'm sure we can also look at it in a way that we say it's not about going back to a place in the past, but the discussion has to happen, because bioeconomy in the current agro-industrial model means the continuation of colonial land grabs in the global south. And therefore chances, to talk about chances, for me, is papering over and hiding the reality that a chance for one in the global north means a lot of suffering and a lot of land grab in another part of the world. The examples, almost all of them, involved northern-based companies or northern-based money implicated in capturing and grabbing large areas of land in the global south. That's the definition of a colonial practice, and it must end. But it is an essential part of the bioeconomy as we see it today. As long as that reality isn't ended, I think talking about chances for the bioeconomy is ignoring the reality of bioeconomy for a large part of the global population.
Thank you very much. Joachim, before I bring you in, let's bring 2 more people from the audience, and then you have the chance to react.
Thank you, Valentine Friedl from Euractiv. Question to Morgan Odie. First of all, thank you, Morgan, for stressing the class aspect of climate change. That is very important. And my question is, Meloni, as well as the Commissioner Hansen, are using the word food sovereignty quite frequently. Yesterday at the press conference, he said it maybe 3 or 4 more times. So what can La Via Campesina do to reclaim this concept?
And maybe another one.
We have 2 more.
Okay, then we take all the 3. There was Sergio Baffoni from EPN, I saw him.
Just a question about the bioeconomy. Maybe this is a matter of name, because historically, in the recent history, bioeconomy has been used as name to define industrialization of nature. And that might be the issue. Actually, it has been bioeconomy until few decades ago, but now it's used in a completely different shape, and we have not confused between the 2 bioeconomies, the nature-based and people-based bioeconomy and the grabbing-based bioeconomy.
Should we gather two more questions? Or?
No, just but I would first give Joachim the chance to react to, do you have positive aspects regarding the bioeconomy, and then Morgan, it's up to you to respond.
Yeah, that's a matter again of the definition of bioeconomy. My job at the moment is for the Jülich Research Center. We are in a project supporting farmers in Vietnam in the transition to organic agriculture. Certified organic agriculture needs certified input. So far, farmers in Vietnam only got certified fertilizer, organic fertilizer, imported from Italy. We are helping them to set up organic fertilizer and organic plant treatment production in Vietnam, and to get that certified, and that is bioeconomy. And that is replacing Italian imports by domestic production by the farmers themselves. I wouldn't call that imperialism. So that's probably the two different kinds of bioeconomy that we have. But let me say two short remarks to the other aspect. We know pretty well that all biomass in the earth is not sufficient to replace fossil fuels. And we also know that because energy, material, and land are limited resources, sooner or later, and at best now, we should ask what to do with it. It is not about scarcity, as economists define it. It is about resource constraints. And when we had the last time resource constraints in Germany, it was the gas crisis 2 years ago. Then the chemical and the pharmaceutical industry declared that in a real constrained situation, allocation can no longer be left to the market, and requested quota for them. So the question then is, when we are living in resource constraints, who can decide and who has to decide for which purpose and for which audience the limited resources are used? And that is a different question and a different economic system than we had so far. And the last point is, I think if we are really fundamentally thinking about what is the change we are facing, it is a change that all throughout the history of humankind, we were in a situation that the independent factor was influencing the development of the human societies was nature and natural resources. And the dependent factor was we. We had to adapt. For 300 years, we have brought ourselves into an exceptional role by using fossil fuels. And at that time, the independent factor became our wants and wishes and consumption. And the dependent factor was nature, because we exploited it more and more and pumped and dug out more when we wanted more. That time is coming to an end. The fossil era is almost over. And that means we are back to the bioeconomy, where we are the dependent factor. And the question is, how do we adapt to the limits which are set by nature in a situation where the planetary boundaries have been transgressed in 7 of 9 cases, and that makes every adaptation more difficult every year? That is the questions we have to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Morgan, there was a direct question for you.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, in a way, well, food sovereignty is a claim that was first made by Via Campesina in '96 against free trade, because it was against the idea that food security would be achieved through the globalization of economy and making the food cheaper. But that was not taking into account the fact that the food producers are the poor. And so if you make the food cheaper, it is at the expense of already the poor, and so it's increasing the problem instead of solving the problem. The problem is about inequalities. So it's about ensuring that the poor people, the peasants, the working class have enough incomes through their production or through their salaries in order to be able either to produce the food that they need or to buy the food that they need. So making the food cheap is never the way towards ensuring that nobody is hungry in the world. It's about ensuring enough equality and fair wages for the workers, including the peasants and the agricultural workers. And so now a lot of politicians in Europe in particular are using food sovereignty for food nationalism. So it's by Italian or by French or by German. But what is funny is that they will never accept that African countries are food sovereign. So food sovereignty is only for us, not for the others. So we want to protect ourselves from the cheap imports from outside. But we don't want other countries to be able to protect themselves from the exports that we do as Europeans to them. And that's all the trick, we believe, about environmental standards. And that's where we do not agree with big farmers' organizations who are pretending to have the right, who are saying we are the best. We in Europe are producing the best food, so we have the right to protect ourselves, but we should be able to continue to export to other countries. And what we are saying in Via Campesina is that as European countries and farmers, we do have the right for protection. But so have the people and the farmers in Latin America, in Asia, and in Africa. Because we want to produce what can be produced locally, we want to be able to produce it locally. And there are things where we do want to exchange. So we are against free trade, but we are not against trade. And for this, we are promoting a new trade framework based on food sovereignty that say that the priority should be given for local food production, and then we can exchange. But we can exchange in fair conditions, not necessarily with using dollar. We can use other currencies. And when we exchange, it should not be because countries are heavily indebted and that if they want to have a new IMF loan, they need to export because otherwise they are blackmailed to not get a new loan, which we know is the reality right now. So the conditions for true food sovereignty, as Via Campesina we are defending it, is it's food sovereignty for everybody in the world. It's people's food sovereignty. So it's not about government or TNCs. It's about democracy. It's about democratic decisions about food and agriculture. And I'm telling you that in France, when they are using food sovereignty, they are using it to say that there should not be any democratic discussion about agriculture. We should not discuss how water is being used for agriculture. And we say that we should discuss it. Because water is for everybody. Water is for drinking. And so we have the right as the people to discuss how water is being used. And that they want to prevent this discussion. And I would like to say another thing about bioeconomy. Bioeconomy as a concept has been imported in the early year 2000 to Europe, but it was first developed very strongly in the US context by transhumanist libertarian groups, which were developing a new concept about technologies around biotech, information technologies, nanotechnologies, and cognitive technologies. And these people, it was all about artificialization of nature and thinking about a new way, a new capitalism. And that new capitalism is where the wealth should be about a new wave of privatization and financiarization of the nature. So privatization of seeds, making seeds all GMOs, and all these new NGTs, and ensuring that all seeds become commodities. About the financiarization of all nature services. And those solutions about green capitalism, they are all increasing inequalities. They are all against indigenous people, and they are all against the peasants, and they are all against the working class in the north and in the south. So I think it's really time now that we react as social movements and that we say that these solutions promoted by the big capitalists, they are not for us, and we should promote other solutions based on equality and based on social justice.
Thank you very much. We take one more question from the audience.
Okay, this is Flavia Mara from World Vision Germany. Thank you so much for speaking up on so many topics that I guess many of us wished to hear yesterday in the high-level panel and discussion. Yesterday they mentioned often the G20 bioeconomy initiative. So I would like to hear from you, what's your take on that? This is a very example on how bioeconomy could be implemented globally. And yeah, I mean, Joachim, you mentioned that the biomass is not necessary, is not enough to replace fossil fuel goods. Plus, we know that land degradation percentage is very high. 40% of land is degraded. So yes, where are the resources to grow this amount of biomass? So how do you see the opportunity to enhance and chance to integrate the concept of limits in this bioeconomy approach? I'm just mentioning degrowth. Is there an opportunity for that, or from a civil society perspective, you would just say to let's boycott this approach and let's focus on what already exists and is there? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there one more? No. Is there one more?
Yeah.
Okay. Then we take one last question from the audience.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for those wonderful insights. This is Rakesh. I represent an organization which works closely with 4 million farmers in India. I believe, as we saw from the presentation, the relevance of bioeconomy is well accepted. The problem lies in maybe disproportionate resource allocation and utilization. And that graph was very revealing in terms of different countries having that imbalance. So my question is, do you have any instances? On the other hand, if you see, the focus on bioeconomy actually puts a lot of leverage and control with the local communities and the farmers. So are there any instances where you have where a very proactive policy framework is actually helping in positive transformation? And second, something which was related to the question what the earlier gentleman asked, is the nomenclature itself a bit of contributing to the problem? Like in India, we have, instead of the term as bioeconomy, we have a lot of focus on nature-based solutions. So whether that itself can be thought of as a better nomenclature. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a last round now here on the stage, and who want to go first? It was about in baking degrowth in the concept of bioeconomy.
Degrowth for some, for sure, is needed. But maybe you remember the graph that was also mentioned by the last speaker. There is a huge inequality in the world. And we in this room are probably part of that. We will need to talk about reducing material consumption, period. For others, it is not about degrowth. When I think about the families in Madagascar who have been pushed off their land, so Tutsi Green can grow first jatropha, then geraniums, and then trees for carbon offsetting, a family there can empty their house in 20 minutes so we can live there for the time we're there. I think if you can empty your house in 20 minutes, degrowth isn't the priority. Land reform is the issue. And that is would be my main response to the last question. Are there policies? Yes, there are. It's not as if we didn't know what's wrong in the world. It's not as if we didn't know that there is injustices and the long shadow of colonization that still dominates a lot of how we do business today. We also know that land is very, very unequally distributed in large parts of the world. So land reform as the basis and the starting point for the bioeconomy discussion would be a good starting point, I think. What we see in almost all countries in the global south is a rolling back of land reform processes. And carbon sequestration discussions play a very important role in that. Carbon sequestration has become the tool to undermine land reform. In lots of, we're running out of time, but we could go through the changes in Brazil, how the change in the forest code is making it much more difficult to engage in land reform because the large landowners can now claim that there is no unused, or that all the land has a social purpose, and that purpose is carbon sequestration. That undermines the land reform process that the landless peasant movement has been pushing. We could go around the world in a lot of the global south to see how bioeconomy policies are undermining the necessary land reform policies that exist. And so it's not about not knowing, it's about not wanting to act on what we all know is needed for a just world that feeds people. I leave it there.
Thank you very much. We have 2 minutes left, so please, the two of you, be very brief, if possible.
Okay. There was one question about G20 and the bioeconomy initiative.
Yeah, maybe you can
even as I presented the conclusions we had as some bioeconomy council members, the answer was simply resist. Do everything to undermine that. Secondly, yeah, that's what we asked from our government. Can ask them. Huh? The second thing is sequestration. Sequestration is a fake solution. Sequestration simply is no solution to the climate problem. And it's not only undermining land reform, it is also undermining decarbonization in the north. So we should attack it from both sides. It's simply nonsense. Last sentence, we are living in a poly crisis. We have the energy, we have the climate, we have the biodiversity, we have the social polarization, we have the poverty, we have the north-south discrepancy, blah, 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 blah. And we cannot afford to ignore all these crises until one or the other has been solved. They are all present now, we have to address them together. And that is a big challenge that we have. On the limits to bioeconomy, yes, it's very easy in Germany to, for example, to start an industry sector. It is easy to end an industry sector, but we have no tools to limit one. And my suggestion is that we have physical limits in terms of tons of material which are either imported or produced to be in there. And last sentence, in my understanding, sustainable degrowth or socially just degrowth in the north has, and the movements doing that, have always been the direct correspondence to environmental justice in the south.
Thank you so much. And Morgan, you have the final 2 sentences.
I think we have very clear proposals to deal with the poly-crisis that we have. Agrarian reform, agroecology, peasants and indigenous people's right, and a new trade framework based on food sovereignty. It's very concrete. And I think that we know that we have the US against us on all those things. They vote against UNDROP. And now it's a question where Europe is standing, because I think that in European governments are not very clear. And I think that we do want to push very strongly for European governments to be for social justice, for environmental justice. To be honest, right now I'm quite skeptical, and we can be. But I think that we have a responsibility as Europeans to not fall on the wrong side, where we have been for such a long time of being the colonizer or being the oppressors. And we want to stop with that. And I think that we want to be with the peoples of the global south for justice. And that's, I think, what we are trying to build with Via Campesina, also in Europe, with the peasants' organization in Europe. And I think that it is also a call for other people to join social movements in Europe, in the global north, to ensure this new internationalism from below. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wait a second. I think we can conclude that bioeconomy is not the new world formula. That only sustainable ecological, sustainable economy is a long-term economy, and also social just economy is a long-term economy. I would like to thank very much to all the panelists and to the stage, to you here for coming here, and to Josephine Koch, who organized most of the things here. So thank you very much for coming.